So, hello and welcome to another What Makes a Difference podcast. And today, Ali, what are we talking about?
Well, you and I were just having a really interesting conversation about security. And
Well, we were modeling each other's version of
yeah,
what security is for us.
yeah. And we thought it was going to be quite relevant to share, given that we focus and support that change journey, the transition point, and the emotional impact that we have, because it's kind of relevant sometimes within that too.
Definitely. Well, in the uniformed services is quite a secure environment, isn't it? So job-wise, salary-wise, got accommodation. There's all those, there's food, you got food there. I know that's changed a bit, but still there's all those elements in place. You know what you're doing pretty much every day. You're kind of told what to do, but there's quite a bit of leeway in that, what you're doing as well. So there's all those elements of being secure in that situation. Whereas compared to generally on Civvy Street, there's a lot more ambiguity, isn't there? There's somebody will go in to do a job and they'll be given a task, but they don't have to report to anybody as such unless it's the end of the program, the end of the project. It's kind of get on and do it yourself. And there's not necessarily the security of, do I have a job next week? So that insecurity, depending on the job role and everything else, is would I be looking for a job in 6 months' time or a year's time? How's the company doing and all that sort of stuff?
So when we were modeling that, and the conversation we were having after about it, because you challenged me on my description of security.
Yeah, so should tell them what the metaphors were.
Yeah.
So mine was basically all around is shipping, or it was like an old naval frigate, something along those sort of lines, anchored that's deep down on the seabed. So there's movement in it, and any new information, anything like that, says capacity for that storage to increase. So everything is lashed down. But if a new bit of information or a new idea or a new concept come in, then that could be, the lashings could be undone, and then that's slotted in somehow, then secured back down until something else needs to be adjusted, taken in, removed, or whatever else.
And mine was almost like a sphere or a ball, and I described it as glass-like, being transparent and clear. And you challenged me on that because of the glass type, and it was a good challenge to make, because you'd said to me, does that not make it fragile? And Maris, because you'd said, is that, because I'd used almost like, I'd asked you if you'd ever seen like a glass blower.
Yeah.
And you asked me whether or not that ball was it still in the forming, the melding stage, or was it solid? And I'd said that what was interesting about that was the ball is, the pre-stage is almost like the grains of sand, which are the beliefs, the values, the perceptions, the trusts. And what goes round about that is permissions, which allow movement. So you had movement in yours, the capacity for movement, and so did I. And with yours, your description of lashed down and anchored, and I particularly like that sort of like being able to add things under the lashings. It's almost like the known and the unknown and where they place.
Yeah, well, a bit like yours, it gives that movement with the sea, doesn't it? Even though the ship is generally going to stay there, got a capacity for movement and making those slight adjustments.
So that got us talking about that transition process and what sometimes makes that so challenging, which is the level of unknowns compared to knowns.
And And you're leaving that essentially a secure environment. Whereas I mentioned before, you're getting the pay, you've got the accommodation, you know what you're doing day in, day out. You know, if you're generally, you know, when you're getting posted, it may be, hopefully it's not about a week before you're supposed to be going due to their poor admin.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, you're given quite a bit of advance notice of when you're doing this, when you're doing that. And so you're able to make plans and adjust.
So what goes under the lashings for you?
Well, I just had bits of extra information, ideas, concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And something that's not so useful gets taken out.
Ever practical, Rich, ever practical.
Exactly.
That ambiguity in civilian life, then, is that, if I use your metaphor, how much is under the lashings then in that movement to civilian life? How much is secured and strapped down? How much is known compared to what was before?
I think that varies on person to person, doesn't it? So with some people, they can make a smoother transition. Not to say easier, because I don't think it necessarily is. That's relative to the individual. So I think that depends on family, community, self-worth, self-belief, and a whole host of other things that are mixed in with that. So if somebody's gone out, or somebody's who's leaving or left, and they get knocked back after job after job after job, that then can lead to a whole host of things like self-worth, self-belief, going, I'm not valuable, so they go for what might be considered a lower status job from what they were. And that can take a huge knock-on effect. And if they don't have that community or that support around them, that can then lead to things like isolation, loneliness, depression, anxiety, and all those other concerns and worries that come along with that, all that.
Well, if you think about it, if I go back to the ship,
ship's free to move.
Ship's free to move as long as it's well provisioned. It needs to be well provisioned in order for that movement to be fully enabled.
And there's also a limit to the cargo hold as well, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you put too much in, it's going to sink.
Mm-hmm.
Or there won't be enough room for the sailors. But if you don't put enough in, it might be too buoyant.
It's unstable.
It's unstable.
And it's not got enough provision and supply to enable the journey.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The grains of sand that make up my ball, that point of clarity, the more grains of sand, the more clarity, the more capacity for movement. And that comes back to that ambiguity piece. Because when you raised that and said, would that be a good podcast? I'd said to you, is this also about power versus powerlessness? Because sometimes that anxiety, the stress and the pressure comes from points where you're reliant on other people's actions, not your own.
Yeah.
Or where you don't have the capacity to make the decision you want to at the time.
Yeah. So there's somebody taking away those decisions for you and you're unable to make them. And then on the other side of that coin then is there's too many decisions to be made. Mm-hmm. And just completely overwhelmed by circumstances around you.
So that would be the equivalent of that ship being bombarded with lots of cargo and not knowing where or how to store that because the instructions for the storage or the placement haven't been adequately explained.
Well, if you use the word bombarded, then there's effectively an enemy ship coming in and it's firing its cannons at you. So that's like the overwhelm, isn't it? There's too much choice. There's too much to take on board. Literally, so you've got all of that coming in at you and then eventually potentially sink your ship.
But some of the words you used were buffeted and battered by the winds. But that's why things have to be lashed down to secure them to be able to use a shipping metaphor or the sea metaphor to ride the storm. If it's not secured and lashed down,
you're going to lose your cargo.
You're going to lose your cargo. Yeah. But those lashings are the things that are known, that are predictable, that are, and I'm using predictable not because that would imply that they're boring, but because they're so well known that you can anticipate them. So that would be things like the beliefs, the values, the behaviors that are ingrained in everybody when they're in the military.
Mm.
So you can predict an outcome in a certain event. You know the likelihood of a response. All of that is already there.
Yeah. So maybe enemy is the wrong word I use for if that other ship comes in. So where I'm going kind of with that is when I've worked with other supporting roles, working with other people to help them get to a better place, they've not been able to have that mental capacity to take that on board, or they've had too many agencies. So it could be housing, it could be finances, it could be social services, it could be the probation service, it could be a whole host of other organisations, and they're going, I can't deal with this. That's like that ship coming in, firing all its ammunition at you, and like just overwhelmed by.
Or again, another sea metaphor, water metaphor, or being flooded, almost like a tsunami hitting you.
Yeah.
This wave of information, but if it all hits at once.
Yeah. Or if you, I don't know what else goes into your grain of sand, but if you all got too many grains of sand coming in, that ball's going to span too quickly. Or if you don't have enough, you're not able to expand that board or take anything else new in.
Well, the grains of sand, when I was thinking about it, I'd said to you that some of those are things like financial stability, but the vast majority of them are values, beliefs, and trusts, which allow like an outer layer of permissions, and it's the permissions that the ball moves within. Because because if I have the values, the beliefs, and the trusts, that the movement within those permissions becomes really safe. It enables more movement, more exploration because of the permissions, because of the truths, the trusts, because of the values, because of the beliefs, the predictability of the outcomes, because of what's known.
Yeah. And as we mentioned before, we are prediction-making machines.
Yeah.
So if someone's completely taken away from you and you can't make a prediction as to what's happening next, you're kind of on shaky ground, aren't you?
Well, that's when you start making shit up. Because you're desperately trying to fix not one scenario or have a solution for not one scenario. Your brain goes into creativity mode and starts thinking, well, it could be this or this or this or this. Yeah. And now you have to have solutions for all of them, not just one.
Well, that's your metaphor, isn't it, for anxiety? Making shit up. Was never going to happen.
Yeah, going so far forward in your timeline that you think you're Doctor Who because now you're making shit up and not responding to it as if it's happening right now. Because it's just your brain trying to contingency plan the unknown.
Yeah.
Those lashings for that cargo are really important.
Well, if they were, it'd slip off the side, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
They'd be overboard.
So what the lashings made of?
Hemp rope.
Hemp rope.
So it's an old sailing ship.
It's interesting because rope's made up of individual strands, lots and lots of strands. Because if there's not enough, then the rope's not rope, it's string.
Absolutely. So I wonder, for our listeners and who's ever watching, is if there's uncertainty in your life, where can you find some security somewhere?
Yeah, I was just thinking the same, Rich. Or how do you limit the ambiguity? Or how do you manage that so that you start to remove some of the ambiguity?
Yeah, what's your points of control?
Do you have a model that helps you establish the points of control and remove the ambiguity?
Yeah.
Because you and I do.
We just told you.
Mm-hmm. No, but how we work is that really, isn't it? It's almost.
So I guess that goes with what's the predictable thing that you can find, isn't it?
How do you establish its predictability?
Mm-hmm.
How do you, if somebody doesn't use the same terminology, the same reference points as you, how do you establish where you are in relation to that? Now I'm thinking about the bulk of a lot of the coaching conversations that we have. The conversation I have repeatedly with people is about contracting and bids. It's about how do you get the clarity you need in an ambiguous world?
Mm-hmm.
What do you use conversationally to limit the number of options that you have to make decisions about or navigate through? How do you establish expectations?
And I think we've also mentioned that contracting and business, not just to other people, that's to yourself.
Very much. Very much.
So what are you fulfilling today with your own contracts that help you predict what's going to happen tomorrow?
That's about choices and decisions as well, isn't it?
Yeah, planning.
Planning.
And for some people like myself, that's a bit of a dirty word.
I do it reluctantly, but when I do, I'm quite good at it. I'm much more like the person that's likely to go, screw it, I fancy going somewhere this weekend. Right, got my passport, I'm heading to the airport, see what the first plane is I can get on. In terms of that transition then, Rich, it can go really well if the core environmental elements are in play. But at some point, I think those values, those beliefs, those trusts and permissions for everyone still need to be established.
Yeah. Well, for that ship, they can also go to the dock, can't it? For rest, repair, recuperation, resupply, put a new crew in, find a better captain, better navigator.
Well, interestingly enough, just because a ship starts off as one thing doesn't mean to say it can't repurpose into another.
No.
So in my misspent youth, I worked for a company that had some floating nightclubs that I worked within. And they used to be car ferries. But they weren't car ferries anymore. They were nightclubs. They still had the rotating plate, because it used to be quite interesting watching people. They go on the dance floor, the DJ would put the rotating plate on, and then you see people trying to orientate themselves to like, where am I? Because they'd come off the dance floor at a different place they went on and not know where they were. It used to get more amusing as the night progressed.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, that wasn't the one Nick Sturgeon decided to build, was it? Had built? No.
No, the other amusing part was the gangplanks. People used to forget that where they were moored was tidal. So they'd come at low tide when the gangplank was level, and when they would leave at the end of the night, they couldn't figure out why their legs hurt, because they'd been walking uphill because it was moored and secured to the quay side. The ship would tilt, so they would end up spending half the night walking uphill to the bar, and then getting off at the end of the night. They would be like almost like a vertical drop off the gangplank.
Yeah.
Not good after lots of alcohol and in stiletto heels, honestly. Seriously not.
No.
But coming back to what we were talking about.
Well, we can always help you clean off the barnacles and give your ship a little bit of a overhaul, can't we?
Well, in effect, yeah, what we offer is a dry dock that says, let's reprovision the ship. Let's look at how you are storing the cargo, what cargo you now want to carry, and what you're making those ropes from.
Yeah.
Because the ship may be repurposed. It still needs all of that. And that can be rebuilt. So what's your takeaways, Rich?
Is how predictable are things for you? What cargo are you storing that you don't need to store anymore?
Mm-hmm. Very valid.
So yeah, what can you ditch that's not worth holding on to? And yours, Ali?
But even though the use may change, it still means that the vessel can be seaworthy. It can still go places, do things. That if we can establish the known and have a method for establishing that known, then it enables movement.
Mm-hmm.
It enables progression. And you can learn how to do that.
Yeah.
It's not unique to one environment, but it can be a learned skill. And we can show you how.
Mm-hmm. So if you'd like to get hold of us, our email address now is in the show notes. And our websites are as well.
They are indeed.
And you can find us on YouTube and Spotify. So please do like, share.
Likes and shares always welcome. Comments always welcome.
Absolutely.
And if there's anything that we said that you're particularly interested in, and as Rich says, reach out.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Until next time.
Until next time.